You've probably felt it, that invisible weight. You change cities, relationships, jobs, but somehow, you keep ending up in the same emotional place, like you're trapped in a script you didn't write. You succeed, but it feels empty. You try to relax, but guilt creeps in. You want love, but don't know how to receive it without performing. And the worst part? You can't explain why. What if the real reason isn't about the present, but something hidden, inherited, and unspoken? Carl Jung believed that the most powerful forces in your life are the ones you're not even aware of. And for many, that hidden force has a name: the mother wound. This video will challenge everything you thought you knew about self-worth, identity, and emotional independence. We're not here to blame your mother. We're here to uncover how her presence, or her absence, shaped the very lens through which you see yourself in the world. You'll discover why so many people feel the need to prove their worth, why guilt feels like love, and how early patterns quietly run your adult life. But more importantly, you'll learn how to break free, not by rejecting your past, but by reclaiming your voice. If you've ever wondered why freedom feels unsafe, or why you're so tired of trying to be enough, this might be the truth you've been avoiding, and the clarity you've been searching for. Let's begin. Most people believe their childhood is behind them, but for many, it's still quietly dictating their every move. Carl Jung understood that the mother isn't just a memory or a face from the past. She's the invisible ink in the first pages of your identity. The way she held you, spoke to you, or even looked at you, became your mirror. If you grew up receiving affection and emotional presence, you likely see the world as safe. But if love was mixed with judgment or absence, chances are, you learned to doubt your worth before you could even spell your name. This isn't about blame. It's about decoding the blueprint. Because until you understand the architecture of your self-image, you'll keep building your life on foundations that were never truly yours. Imagine growing up in a house where love came with conditions. Behave, perform, stay small, don't make noise. A child absorbs that, not as rules, but as reality. I must be quiet to be safe. I must please to be loved. These psychological patterns don't disappear with age. They mature with you. You start accepting jobs where you're overlooked, relationships where you give more than you receive, friendships where you're tolerated, not cherished. The mother wound isn't always a scar. Sometimes it's a whisper that says, "You're too much," or "You're not enough." And the tragedy is that most people don't recognize that voice isn't theirs. It was inherited. In poor and working-class homes, the mother is often everything: caregiver, provider, protector. But she's also human, shaped by her own unresolved traumas. Maybe she had to suppress her own dreams to survive. Maybe she was emotionally unavailable not by choice, but by exhaustion. When you grow up watching your mother suffer silently, you learn to do the same. You learn to carry weight that doesn't belong to you. Jung warned that what remains unconscious rules us. That means your drive to overwork, your fear of conflict, your inability to rest, might not be about you at all. They might be survival strategies passed down through the maternal line. A boy who watched his mother cry in silence often grows up believing he must be strong at all costs. A girl who felt ignored might become the woman who never stops giving, just to feel seen. These distortions aren't conscious. They're built into your nervous system, into how you breathe, how you love, how you cope. That's why understanding your childhood trauma isn't about digging up the past for drama. It's about reclaiming the present. It's about realizing that some of your personality traits are actually survival responses. You didn't choose them, you adapted. And now, it's time to ask, are these adaptations still serving you? Shadow work begins here, not in the darkness, but in the origin of light, your first attachments. The unconscious influence of your mother's energy doesn't just live in memory, it lives in your expectations, your reactions, your silence. Every time you hesitate to speak up, compromise your truth, or stay in places that feel heavy, ask yourself, who taught me this was normal? because the answer might trace back to someone who once told you, "Be good." And you translated that into, "Be invisible." Jung's insight wasn't that mothers are to blame, but that we all carry emotional imprints we didn't ask for. And the first step is learning to see them. One common symptom? Chronic self-doubt. You might look confident from the outside, but feel like an imposter inside. Why? Because when you were young, your reflection came from someone who didn't always see you clearly, or worse, only saw you when you met their emotional needs. This creates a fractured self-identity. One part of you is performing, the other is hiding, and no amount of success fixes that fracture until you meet the child inside you and say, "I see you," even when no one else did. That's where emotional healing begins. Not with fixing, but with recognition. For those raised in environments of survival, there's a deep loyalty to suffering. You feel guilty for wanting peace. You feel selfish for saying no. But that guilt, that's not your soul speaking. That's the echo of a system that taught you to abandon yourself to feel worthy. Jung called this the betrayal of the self. And until you break that cycle, you will unconsciously sabotage your freedom. This isn't just theory, it's practical. The next time you feel resistance to rest or joy, pause. Ask, what rule am I following right now? And whose rule is it? That's the start of liberation. And here's the most painful part. Some of the most harmful messages weren't said out loud. They were felt. A sigh, a distant gaze, a withheld smile. You internalized those silences. They taught you who you were allowed to be. But what if those lessons were wrong? What if being too much was just being yourself? Jung believed that healing begins when we question the first truths we were given. Because behind every inherited limitation is a forgotten possibility. A voice that says, "You don't have to live by that script anymore." And in the next section, we'll uncover exactly how that silent script continues to shape your life, without you even knowing. You think you're making choices, but what if some of your choices are actually echoes? What if every time you hesitate, over-apologize, or hold yourself back, you're not acting freely? You're obeying a voice that isn't even yours. Carl Jung warned us that what we don't make conscious becomes fate. And for many, that fate sounds suspiciously like the emotional tone of their childhood home. The tone that said, "Don't be difficult," or "Be nice even when it hurts." These weren't just messages. They became scripts. And even if you moved away, got a job, built a life, that invisible voice may still be whispering, "Don't disappoint. Don't ask for too much." This is how the mother wound lives on, not through loud traumas, but through subtle behaviors. Maybe you cancel your needs to avoid conflict. Maybe you shrink around authority figures. Maybe you feel an urge to rescue others, even when it destroys you. These are not random habits. They are psychological residues, carried not just in your thoughts, but in your nervous system. Jung called these complexes, emotional knots formed early in life, usually around caregivers. When you feel irrational guilt or fear around being honest, that's not weakness. That's an old emotional inheritance speaking. You're not failing, you're repeating. The worst part? These internal patterns are often rewarded by society. People praise you for being selfless, agreeable, easygoing. But inside, you feel invisible. Because part of you knows, being liked isn't the same as being known. And being useful isn't the same as being loved. Yet breaking free feels terrifying. Why? Because your early survival was tied to compliance. You learned that your safety depended on keeping others comfortable, especially your mother. This created a powerful unconscious belief. If I upset her, I lose connection. So now, even as an adult, you may fear that expressing your truth will lead to rejection. Let's get more practical. Think about your job. Do you often over-deliver just to prove your worth? Or your relationships? Do you end up in roles where you're the emotional caretaker? These aren't just personality traits, they're inherited positions. Shadow work isn't about blaming your mother. It's about seeing how you became who you had to be to earn love. And then asking, is this still true? The patterns you're caught in today often mirror emotional dynamics from your past. That's not coincidence. That's conditioning. And if you never pause to question the origin of your instincts, you'll keep mistaking pain for purpose. Jung taught that liberation starts with recognition. The voice that says, you can't, you're not ready, or you'll never be enough. It didn't start with you. Maybe it came from your mother's anxiety, her shame, her silence. Maybe she never said it out loud, but you felt it, in her sighs, in her distractions, in the way she tensed when you expressed too much. Children absorb energy before language. You knew what was safe to show and what wasn't. And now, as an adult, you censor yourself without realizing, not because you're broken, but because you adapted to survive. These adaptations are not failures. They were intelligent responses to emotional environments. But what once kept you safe may now keep you small. Many adults live trapped in roles they never consciously chose: the fixer, the pleaser, the silent one. And they wonder why life feels heavy. The truth is, toxic guilt is one of the strongest chains passed through generations. You feel bad for needing space, for saying no, for wanting something more. But guilt is not a sign of wrongdoing. It's often a sign that you're breaking an old agreement, one you never truly made. Let's not pretend this process is clean. Unlearning inherited beliefs is messy. You'll doubt yourself. You'll feel like a bad child, even when you're doing what's healthy. But that's how you know you're close to the core. The mind will resist what threatens the identity it was taught to protect. But the body knows. It tightens, flinches, contracts. Not because you're unsafe, but because you're unfamiliar with being free. And freedom isn't always euphoric. Sometimes it's confusing. Still, every time you honor your voice instead of the echo, you reclaim a piece of yourself, one truth at a time. And here's the paradox. The more you make peace with the inherited voice, the less power it has. You stop needing to prove your worth. You stop fearing disapproval. You begin to feel whole, not because your mother changed, but because you did. Jung believed that the unconscious becomes a guide once it's faced. And that means the very voice that used to sabotage you can become a signal, not to obey, but to awaken. And in the next section, we'll walk the final and most powerful path of all, the path to authorship, the process of becoming your own parent, your own voice, your own safe place. There comes a moment, quiet, heavy, when you realize you've been living a life that isn't truly yours. Not because you chose it, but because you inherited it. The rules, the silence, the identity. Carl Jung called the path out of this repetition individuation, the psychological process of becoming who you actually are, not who you were taught to be. And make no mistake, this path isn't soft or poetic. It's raw, it's disorienting, because it forces you to ask the question most people avoid their entire lives. Who am I without the roles I play for others? It's not a question of rebellion. It's a question of authorship. Individuation doesn't start with grand gestures. It starts with noticing. Noticing when you laugh at something you don't find funny. When you say yes but mean no. When you tolerate what secretly drains you. These micro moments reveal how much of your life is still driven by unconscious scripts. And most of those scripts trace back to childhood, to the emotional climate shaped by your caregivers. You were praised for being easy, punished for being loud, rewarded for self-erasure. So you learned, stay small to stay loved. And now, you're unraveling that belief thread by thread. It's slow, but necessary. This journey is especially brutal for those raised in homes where survival came before self-expression. When your mother was overworked, emotionally unavailable, or silently wounded, you adapted by becoming what she needed, not what you were. That's not love. That's substitution. And now, decades later, you wonder why you feel disconnected, unfulfilled, like something's always missing. The answer isn't more achievement. It's emotional healing, which begins when you stop running from your unmet needs and start meeting them yourself. This is not selfishness. It's psychological rebirth, and it requires reparenting the very parts of you she couldn't reach. True individuation means learning to sit with your desires without shame, to want joy without guilt, to feel safe in your own presence, and yes, to mother yourself, not with perfection, but with patience. You give yourself what you once begged for: affirmation, space, protection. You no longer need to be rescued. You no longer confuse sacrifice with love. This shift is not intellectual. It's somatic. You feel it in your spine when you say no, in your chest when you breathe without apologizing, in your heart when you finally understand, I don't have to carry what isn't mine anymore. There will be days when you relapse into old patterns. You'll shrink again. You'll overgive again. You'll feel guilty just for existing. That's okay. Individuation is not a straight line. It's a spiral. Every loop brings you deeper, not further. And the deeper you go, the more compassion you find. Not just for yourself, but for your mother too. You start to see her not as the villain or the saint, but as a woman. Incomplete, wounded, doing her best with what she had. And in seeing her humanness, you liberate your own. The spell breaks. The cycle softens. You finally exhale. The most powerful transformation happens when you stop projecting your unmet needs onto others. You no longer need a partner to fix your broken parts. You no longer expect your boss to give you the approval your mother withheld. This is the end of emotional outsourcing. You become your own refuge, your own authority, your own voice. And with this inner alignment, you attract people who reflect your truth, not your trauma. That's how generational healing works. Not by confronting the past with anger, but by refusing to repeat it unconsciously. One choice at a time, one breath at a time. Here's a practice. When you feel overwhelmed by guilt, ask yourself, whose story am I reenacting right now? When you fear being seen, whisper, I am not the child I once was. When you long for love, tell yourself, I don't have to earn it anymore. These are not affirmations. They're recalibrations. Slowly, you rewrite your internal script. You stop living as the character your family needed, and you step into authorship. Jung didn't promise freedom without discomfort, but he promised that facing the unconscious makes it a partner, not a prison. You begin to lead, not follow. And this is where your true story begins. Not the one handed to you, but the one you create. You'll still feel echoes of the past, but they'll no longer dictate your present. You'll still remember the pain, but it won't own your voice. You become the narrator, the sculptor, the mother to your inner child. You honor what came before, but no longer bow to it. Because healing doesn't mean erasing your history. It means choosing your direction. And now that you've reclaimed your pen, the next page is yours. In the next section, we'll connect everything you've learned into one final insight: how to begin writing your life with clarity, courage, and conscious freedom. You were never broken, only conditioned. The invisible expectations, the inherited guilt, the silent roles you played just to feel loved, they weren't your fault. But now, they are your responsibility. And that's not a burden. It's your power. Carl Jung taught that we are not what has happened to us. We are what we choose to become. And now you have a choice. Keep repeating the story written by fear, silence, and survival. Or start writing one born from awareness, strength, and truth. You don't have to heal everything overnight. You don't need to confront your mother or rewrite your past, but you do need to pause and ask yourself, what parts of me are still waiting to be seen? Which habits do I carry that no longer belong to who I am? And who could I become if I stopped living for approval and started living for truth? This video wasn't just about understanding your past. It was an invitation to reclaim your authorship, to mother yourself with kindness, to break patterns not with force but with clarity, and to remember, you are not the echo, you are the voice. If this journey spoke to something deep inside you, take a breath and take the next step. Subscribe to the channel, activate the bell, and continue walking with us. Because this is just the beginning. Let's keep uncovering the truth together.